And when they decide that we don't represent them anymore, we step aside. This is the beauty of our country, you know.
You have many beauties. That is not one of them. I have to ask Hussein, because we've left him out of the conversation, and you are a major employer across the region. You have one of the most successful companies, properties. I want to ask you about Lebanon specifically. You've got such incredible talent in this country. So many people, you know, the minute they leave, they want to work and they change the world. But in Lebanon specifically, given the things you've heard today and what you've heard over the last several months, with hundreds of thousands of people taking to the street, very unhappy with their government, and understanding as you do balance sheets and when numbers don't add up, would you invest more in Lebanon today?
Can I bore you with a little bit of introduction? My father told me, don't be in politics. And I'm glad I listened to him very carefully. Listening to those two people here, I never want to be in politics. But as a businessman and looking at the region, you know, your heart breaks what's happening. I think the situation is much deeper than a bad or a corrupt government or a dictatorship government or a democratic government. Those are, okay, we have all mix of them in the Middle East. But I think a lot of time we don't address the main issue. Some of those governments brought by the people. So why the people in the last 10, 20, 50, 60 years could not elect good government? We need to ask that question. Lebanon is a 60 years democracy, the oldest in the Middle East. And to be fair, it's not a corrupt democracy. It's not, you know, people don't, when the voting is there, it's at least fair. Nobody comes and says, you know, there's a cheating. So people in the Arab world, I'm not talking about Lebanon, in the Arab world have to learn when they go to elections, they elect not the person they like, not the person for whom his religion, not the person because it's his tribe. And this is the biggest disaster we have. And we live in it, not in election, in every day, in hiring an employee. I mean, I as a businessman get so much pressure. Oh, he's my cousin. I say, I cannot operate that way. And a lot of people dislike me because I don't give those favors. My own family members work in my company. They have to perform. If they don't perform, thank you. One of my family members, I kicked her out after 4 years. I said, enough is enough. I can't take you any longer. Okay, so the challenge we have in the Middle East, people are, not being professional in their elections or in their decisions. It's going by emotions, religion, sectarian. That's totally not acceptable. Number two, we cannot forget the foreign interference. This region, 20th century, I read history, I like history, has been the disaster century for Middle East. Since the First World War, Arab countries were divided into pieces, foreign interference, then the creation of Jewish state Israel, 1948 war, which ended up in three revolutions, coups, and in Egypt, in Iraq, kingdoms were fallen, military regimes came. They were not the best, military officers of, like Gaddafi and others who were, 28, 30 years old, ruling the country with no knowledge. Then we have 67, which was another disaster. Another country been fallen, like Libya, and a few other regimes change. And then we have, further.
It's not been great.
Exactly. And a lot of interference from superpowers, okay?
But at the moment, you've got to have interference in order to, in Lebanon, make the books balance. You've got to have some foreign help, whatever they have done in the past. And let me tell you, they have, of course, done a lot of things. You're absolutely right. But this is the issue, isn't it? It's creating a credible government that foreign investors, whether they be governments, the IMF, World Bank, would actually want to be a part of. Do you see that that's going to happen in Lebanon today?
Well, I would wish it for the people of Lebanon. As I said, I believe it's a unique country. It is still providing a regional public good in many levels. However, I think in many Arab states, I've spent half of my life also in and out of the region, and I specialized at one stage in Middle East studies. But I believe that a lot of the politicians, but also public sentiment, has been anchored too much always around the foreign side. What happened, the interference, the wars, There is a domestic responsibility, there's an own responsibility, and I do not think you can fault citizens for choosing the types of leaders that have been offered to them in a system that has mostly not been free. We all know that democratic elections are an element to a fully fledged democracy, but the elections are the process. So I don't fault the citizens. We also, in many liberal democracies, strange leaders are elected. That's not unique. That's not unique to the Middle East. But to the region, we now have a generation, we have a number of issues that are purely geoeconomics. That is high youth unemployment, talent, underutilization, low productivity, and no connect to the future labor market. And for that, you need a functioning system yet again. You need to invest in the type of curriculums. You need to get young people ready for the labor market. You really need to tackle the gender gap once and for all. Not just from a societal perspective, to have equality and equity, from an economic dividend perspective. I mean, Europe is an aging continent, but you have the reverse problem, but turn it into an opportunity, and that has nothing to do with foreign interference, has nothing to do with the 20th century. There's heritage, yes, but there is own responsibility. One cannot maintain this semi-decolonized mindset as if you really, in a way, want to always externalize. The region is wonderful at externalizing. I found when I first came to Lebanon as Undersecretary General, I felt that actually Lebanon was never spoken of. All the beautiful newspapers, they have a few less now, they had to close down, were speaking about every possible problem in the world, particularly in the region, but nobody actually published significant amount, sort of the mirror, what's happening in this country. Everything was a mu'amara. Everything was, and everybody was inviting the conspiracies to come in. But that's an exploitation of your own domestic sovereignty, and it is a big mirror, or rather a cover, behind which you hide your problems. The point is, bring it in, start to deal with it, take responsibility. This is the 21st century, and I find that very mature of a lot of the young people, but also the middle classes, the workers that have been demonstrating in Algeria, in Sudan, in Lebanon. A country that's really fallen foul again of a new sectarian agenda is in Iraq. And of course, regional proxy involvement and interference, for sure. But it is the state. Sovereignty also has to be built, preserved. And from there, you can build out. It's not a theoretical model. It's hard work. And I'm not underestimating all the challenges in such a volatile region with competing interests, also from outside. But that's where the state is so important. It's also personal responsibility.
Yeah,
but I don't blame
if you allow me, see, I started saying, number one was the responsibility of the people. They have to fix their behavior, okay? But we also, unfortunately, cannot ignore continuous interference of the foreign powers in every country. And foreign doesn't mean it's America or Russia or Iran. I'm sorry,
can be
all of
the region.
Okay, I mean, look what happened to Syria. You know, I am not a politician. I am not saying the regime is good or bad. That's not my job. But in the Arab uprising 8-9 years ago, we have, some interesting examples. Let's take an example. We have a lot of good and bad stories. Let's take an example of Oman. I think we had a very wise leader, okay, who there was uprising. There were demonstrations in the street. Look at the history, how he handled them carefully and how he, reacted toward them. He didn't use force, and he solved the problem, and the country is moving very well, okay? There are some good news in the Middle East, if you look at the Middle East. In Saudi Arabia, the changes they're doing today are very good changes, allowing the women to drive and to work. I've been last couple of times in Saudi Arabia. I'm surprised and shocked with the changes on the ground. Okay, I know Saudi Arabia for 30 years. I've been doing business. Okay, so there are some good stories, but there are some horrifying stories like Syria. 2/3 of the population is living in camps. It's terrible. And I think what sometimes people discuss, in my view, is a Panadol. That, we're going to give Lebanon another $1 billion or $10, whatever, that's not going to solve the problem. The problem is much bigger than a donation of a few $1 billion. The problem is very deep.
I want to bring you on that, and that's absolutely correct. Speaking of creative and interesting leadership that we see in the world today, the last time you were here at the World Economic Forum, you spoke to a dear colleague of mine at CNN, and you said to her that you could teach the United States and the United Kingdom something about running a government when there was no government. You were essentially saying you didn't need a budget. You didn't need all of this, these extraneous variables. What I would say to you is Boris Johnson was reelected in a landslide. And Donald Trump, whether you love him or hate him, has created an incredible economy in the United States. What could you teach them? What have you created in Lebanon today?
No, this is not
an
precise.
Economic disaster.
Let me tell you what I said.
Economic disaster,
And
sir.
what is the reality? The reality is that we came to these two governments where we had 12 years of no budget in Lebanon. And we adopted in these 3 years, 3 budgets for the first, this is unfortunate, but this is true. For the first time, 3 budgets. Imagine that we have unaudited accounts in Lebanon since 25 years, and we did it now. So this is the kind of reforms that we need to do. And this is our responsibility. And this is where I agree that the own responsibility that we should be taking first is to be independent and to refuse the foreign interventions. And this is, again, is our responsibility. But one cannot, refuse the fact that there are foreign interventions in Lebanon that are adding to the problem. You yourself, you mentioned in one of your reports the number of countries, a great number. You named them one by one who have influence in Lebanon.
You watch me on CNBC?
Of course, of course.
In preparation for this
especially when you declared your intentions,
Flattered.
about this debate. So it is, it is only.
Our numbers definitely gone up.
I always say, we are independentists by nature, and we refuse foreign interventions. But we cannot say that the Syrian crisis did not affect us. We cannot say that encircling Lebanon with what's happening around them is not affecting the economy. We cannot say that the presence of 40% of our population as refugees and displaced, 200, imagine in any European country if an economy of Europe can withstand with 200 refugees per square kilometer. No. This can add to the crisis. But this does not justify what's happening, because I think that we can fix the problem not by foreign aid. First, this is why we have an opportunity now to reform for the first time
Do you think
our
it's a historic
system.
Opportunity? And the reason I ask this, it's a historic opportunity because at this time you have partnered with Hezbollah, which is a U.S. designated terror organization. And I understand they're a political party in Lebanon. But at the end of the day, this is a historic opportunity because as a result of maximum pressure, whether you love him or hate him, President Trump has put Iran in the crosshairs. And that means their economy is significantly diminished.
Yeah.
And that means the money to Hezbollah is significantly diminished. That means the money going from Iran to Syria is diminished. So you have a historical opportunity to diminish their influence in Lebanon. Can you do that today? Because frankly, a lot of people would like to see that happen before they actually help you with the economic situation you find yourself in.
Yeah.
And that could, in fact, change the game when it comes to $11 billion unlocking from the Cedar Conference, when it comes to U.S. help. And certainly the folks that I speak to in the Gulf are not going to help you if you do not get them out of your government.
You touched on a very sensitive issue.
I know.
Which is very important. Let me tell you. It is, again, our responsibility to fix this. But how do we do it internally and politically by our system, whereby our system, based on balance and equilibrium, does not allow politically any party, whether it's Hezbollah, our party, any other party in Lebanon, to have the say in our politics. No one can withhold everything in the country because of our consensual democracy. Now, having this in mind, when we use what's happening in Lebanon for regional or international benefits, we deviate this opportunity, we deviate that momentum created by the protesters towards something that take the Lebanese into the division. So the problem becomes Hezbollah, and becomes the position of the United States, which is already affecting our economy, the
Bassil,
sanctions on Hezbollah.
The problem
Let me
also
continue.
Hezbollah.
No, I'm not.
There is a non-state
You know,
actor
I'm not
that
saying,
has monopolized access
Which you
to
have
violence.
partnered with in your government.
That precedes
let me
all
continue.
this.
I'm not saying that this is not considered, at least, as a problem by some Lebanese and by the outside the international community. But what I'm saying, if you deviate what is happening now in the streets for an issue that is called Hezbollah, then the Lebanese will be divided on this issue, they are united on fighting corruption and reforming the fiscal policy that we have. Exactly like happened in the Arab Spring. You know, you want Lebanon to turn it into Syria, into Iraq, and to have chaos?
Isn't
and
this
to
the
have,
argument of all Middle East dictators, that it will all fall into chaos if we don't?
No,
if we don't
exactly.
stick to the old regime and the old system?
All I'm saying, don't deviate that, you know, and let us have unity on fighting corruption and reforming. And the issue of Hezbollah or any other political dispute that we have on this place, for example, let's deal with this, you know, and not disregard it, but don't mix it, don't put it, you know, as per some officials, foreign officials, saying that this is why the Lebanese are now protesting. It's for more freedom. No, they are protesting because they lost their money. They are losing their job opportunities. They are not united on any particular political issue. They are united into having their rights and reforming their country. And this is why we are with them. And this is why they are right, and this is why this should continue.
But you weren't with them in all of the years that you've been in government to fix this situation.
By creating, you know, a topic where the Lebanese are not united on it.
Can I just disagree
yes,
on one point? I mentioned on purpose Algeria and Sudan, for instance, because the first generation and the specter of conflict and the descent into total violence, such as Syria or other countries in the region, has been used a lot to say, don't demonstrate anymore, don't ask for more, your citizen rights can wait, because look what happens elsewhere.
This is not the case. We are asking them to continue, not at all.
No.
This idea of, you know, you cannot raise your voice above the voice of the...
I'll finish my sentence, please. So the whole point is, politically, the specter of possible civil war, particularly in Lebanon, has been waged all the time for people to actually stay home. And this doesn't work anymore with young people, young generation. All these new generations are actually blaming their parents that they stayed in the mindset of the fear, which is very understandable because it's still fairly recent and it's been a very traumatic period in Lebanon's history. But the second generation, the second wave now of what we see of citizens claiming their rights to dignity, normal life, security from the state, and in the case of Lebanon too, of course, the big issue that no other actor should have arms outside the control of the state, only the Lebanese armed forces, that's particular to Lebanon. All these are issues that cannot be washed away. Corruption is endemic, but it's also a symptom of a bigger system failure. And I think that's the thing. You can handle corruption, but you need to tackle all the other arms and organs of state, how it's done, how it's managed. That's a big reform agenda, but that's bigger than only the financing. And CEDRE is the solidarity and support of the international community with Lebanon in particular to say, we are with you. But whomever is in government or in parliament or in public service needs to be up to the task. And the intertwining of public servants with parties and financing, I don't think is going to work anymore.
Would you be
I have a question.
Sure.
I mean, the democracies are not working in the Middle East, very obvious. Iraq, Lebanon, other places been tried. Dictatorships are not working. What is the solution? Both those are the two models around the world, isn't it? None of them is working in the Middle East.
Well, you know, I don't think you can say democracy isn't working. Democracy is a slow process. It needs to be allowed to grow. And actually, as I mentioned before, the simple act of voting is not sufficient if the system itself doesn't respect the outcomes. Parliament doesn't work, a police system, the judiciary, it's an entire process. But to say it won't work, sometimes, as is said, it won't work because dictatorship is better or monarchies are better. It's for people to grow and decide this. But what you see in the 21st century with levels of education, transparency, information, most people know how it can be done and they're willing to work for it. and peacefully engage around it, I think that's a very, very big step. But it's ultimately the choice of the country how it wants to organize itself. It's also the choice of the investor if they find that the ease of doing business is proper, if they make a safe investment on their money, or if actually it gets funneled away into an illicit economy at the end of the day. That's affiliated sometimes with arms trade, drugs, etc., etc. We all have these issues. But citizenship needs to be lived and needs to be articulated. I'm not the expert on democratic processes elsewhere, but what's interesting from Santiago to Lebanon to other countries, the nature of protest is the same. Some of them are against the results of globalization, but the demand is always respect, citizenship, dignity, and a future in my own country where people want to build it, or the right to live elsewhere.
I understand you. I know I'm not talking about conspiracy theory and all that, but the problem in the Middle East, when there is a democracy and there are 10 political parties, there are 10 different countries around the world to support every party. And that's they become, a puppet for those countries. And I have not seen around the world very many countries where foreigners interfere in supporting political parties like the Middle East. This is one of the biggest challenges we have, okay? You create democracy and foreigners keep
It isn't like they're falling on ground that is infertile.
Correct.
And that has to do with personal responsibility. We do have to wrap it up, but I have a question for His Excellency.
You have to couple democracy with civil states in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And, this is the only solution. As long as we have the war of gods in our region and our countries, and as long as we have foreign interventions as such, take, the big interest related to everything. So what is our responsibility, the peoples of the region, is to couple democracy like in Lebanon. What is missing is a civil society, and the civil state.
Yeah, one last sentence I have as I said earlier, that we as an individuals have to do something. We complain about corruptions. Each one of us has to look at himself and say, am I supporting corruption? Am I corrupt? And I think a lot of percentage of people, they don't do that. And number of people who go in the streets and claim and say we're going to fight corruption, next day he's himself supporting corruption. Problem comes in us as individuals. Of course. We need to fix ourselves as much as we need to fix the political regimes and other issues.
Minister, I'll leave it with you with this question. Today, Lebanon has above 35% unemployment. And when we talk about the brain drain of Lebanon, which benefits every other country in the world, but unfortunately has a detrimental effect on your future, the latest data that's available suggested that 40% of men and nearly half of all women Lebanese graduates immigrated from 1999 to 2007. When I speak to mothers in your country, those mothers that were holding the lines of protests, they are deeply concerned by the fact that they have to send their children away from their country to find jobs and economic opportunity. Do you not have a moral responsibility here? If you're not doing it and if you're not getting it right, you need to step aside and let someone else come and do this job, because you haven't gotten it right so far. And your country, this beautiful country of amazing people, is being destroyed.
Yeah, it is again the responsibility and the will and the decision of the Lebanese people to decide who will rule and who will govern. In my position as foreign minister, I gave much more time on the immigrants and on bringing them back to the country, connecting with them. And under my term, it was for the first time that the Lebanese abroad had the right, through a law, to recuperate and restore their Lebanese nationality, and more important, to vote abroad. And we are giving back to them their rights because they have to believe in this country again. We did a lot, and there's so much more to do for the Lebanese.
They don't believe
abroad.
in the country right now, sir.
Yeah, and they are right to be.
And you
concerned.
don't believe that's a failure on the part of your government?
Yeah, that's why the government resigned, and that's why we brought now other people to come in place. But it is, in a democratic country like Lebanon, not up to you, not up to me to decide what the Lebanese want. Or else we will be making the mistakes that were made in Syria, in Iraq, and all of the region. Let the people of the region decide what they want. Don't dictate on them based on foreign recipes and on foreign interests and interventions what they want. Let them decide what they want. What the international community can do helping the peoples of the region to secure for them fair and free elections. Fortunately, we have it in Lebanon. Unfortunately, governments are lacking good governance, and that's why what's happening in Lebanon is very healthy to make that change into a secular state, that change into a reformed system based on the fiscal and economic policies that were adopted. We need a productive economy to create jobs. We cannot have a country without agriculture, without industry, based only, on being...
How many years have you had that to create that? How many years have you been in government to help create that narrative?
We have to start it.
We're going to start it now, not the how many years have you been in government?
This is our policy. This is what we've been fighting for since the beginning. There was policies in place neglecting agriculture, neglecting industry, and now this is why we had for the first time a study from McKinsey to have this, this mitigation towards having a productive economy. It will take time, yes, but let's start it. We should start it at some point.
Excellent.
And now the priority is this government should start right away by fixing the fiscal problems in order to secure the money of the people. And
I'm glad they're starting right away, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us. Panelists, we do value your time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. I love